The truest heart in Alderwick that afternoon belonged to the one woman who never once tried to win the Duke's attention. By 3 o'clock, nearly every unmarried lady beneath the age of 30 had found some reason to wander toward the western gardens of Alderwick House, where rumor promised that Vincent Ashcombe, Duke of Ashcombe, would soon join his guests for the autumn promenade. The October air was cool enough to silver every breath, and beyond the Georgian estate's grey stone walls, the hills of Cumberland rolled beneath a pale sky, covered in fading heather and copper-colored trees. Carriages lined the long oak avenue for nearly half a mile, each having delivered another hopeful family to the Duke's annual charity gathering. Inside the rose garden, Lady Caroline Mercer stood beneath a stone arch with 3 young women gathered around her, their silk skirts carefully lifted above the damp gravel. "His Grace prefers intelligence to beauty," Caroline murmured, though she had spent the better part of an hour arranging herself precisely where Vincent would first see her. A ripple of anticipation passed through the garden. The Duke had appeared at the far end of the terrace. Vincent Ashcombe did not hurry. He never needed to. At 36, he possessed the peculiar authority of a man accustomed to rooms changing when he entered them. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in a charcoal coat without unnecessary ornament, he descended the terrace steps while conversations softened around him. Ladies straightened. Mothers smiled. Fans opened. Eliza Hartwell noticed none of it at first. She stood near the outer garden path, adjusting the cuff of a glove that had been carefully mended twice. Her dark chestnut dress was respectable but several seasons behind fashion, and beside the jeweled daughters of earls and wealthy landowners, she seemed almost deliberately plain. Her aunt had reminded her that morning that opportunities did not knock twice upon the doors of impoverished families. Eliza understood perfectly what that meant. She was 24. Her father was gone. The small income he had left behind had diminished until every winter required another quiet sacrifice. Alderwick was supposed to be an opportunity. Vincent Ashcombe was supposed to be the greatest opportunity of all. "Miss Hartwell," Caroline called sweetly, "you are about to miss him." Eliza looked toward the terrace. Vincent was perhaps 60 feet away now, surrounded almost immediately. One lady praised his gardens. Another mentioned her charitable work in London. A third laughed brightly at something he had barely said. Eliza took one uncertain step forward. Then she heard the sound behind her. Not a cry. Something smaller. A basket striking wet gravel. She turned. An elderly woman in a faded brown cloak stood near the garden gate, one hand gripping the iron railing as apples rolled from her overturned basket. Her shoes were muddy. Her gray hair had loosened beneath a modest bonnet. For a moment she appeared more embarrassed than hurt. 2 young ladies passed within a few feet of her. One glanced down and quickly away. The other gathered her skirt closer, careful that the mud should not touch its pale blue hem. "Someone from the household will see to her," Caroline said impatiently. "Come, Eliza. His Grace is looking this way." And he was. Across the garden, Vincent's gray eyes had settled in their direction. Eliza could feel the terrible arithmetic of her circumstances arranging itself inside her mind. One introduction could change her future. One favorable impression could change her family's. The elderly woman bent slowly toward an apple and faltered, catching herself against the gate. Eliza stopped thinking. She turned her back on the Duke. "Madam, please don't," she called, hurrying across the wet path. Behind her came the faint rustle of expensive skirts moving in precisely the opposite direction. Eliza reached the woman and offered both hands. "Are you hurt?" "Only my pride, I think," the stranger replied, attempting a smile. Her voice was unexpectedly composed. Eliza smiled back. "Then we shall rescue that first." She crouched upon the damp gravel and began gathering the scattered apples. Mud darkened the knees of her dress. One glove became stained brown when she retrieved an apple from beneath a hedge. She did not notice. "You will ruin your clothes," the woman said quietly. "Clothes recover remarkably well from mud." "And opportunities?" Eliza paused. Somewhere behind her, polite laughter rose around the Duke. She placed the final apple into the basket. If an opportunity requires me to pretend I did not see someone who needed help, I suspect it was never meant for me." The old woman studied her. Something changed behind those pale eyes, so briefly Eliza might have imagined it. "What is your name, child?" "Eliza Hartwell." The woman repeated it softly, as though committing it to memory. Eliza offered her arm and began guiding her toward the glass orangery where they could escape the gathering drizzle. She never looked back. Had she done so, she might have seen Caroline Mercer watching with thinly concealed amusement. She might have seen several ladies whispering over Eliza's muddy dress. But more importantly, she might have noticed that Vincent Ashcombe was no longer listening to the woman speaking beside him. His gaze had followed Eliza from the moment she abandoned the garden path. From an upper window, he had seen the others pass the elderly stranger without stopping. He had seen Eliza turn away from the most powerful man on the estate without hesitation. And as the orangery door closed behind the two women, the Duke's expression changed almost imperceptibly, because Eliza Hartwell had just done what every lady at Alderwick had spent the afternoon trying desperately to accomplish. She had impressed him. And she had done it without knowing that he was watching. By the time Eliza Hartwell entered Alderwick House that morning, she had already promised herself three things. She would not complain about the cold, she would not allow anyone to pity her, and she would remember that poverty was a circumstance rather than a character flaw. The hired carriage that brought her and her aunt from the village had stopped beneath Alderwick's broad stone portico shortly after 10 o'clock, when mist still floated over Stilmere Lake and the ancient oaks along the drive glittered with the remains of an overnight rain. Eliza stepped down carefully, one gloved hand gathering the hem of her chestnut dress. The gown had belonged to her during better years. Its sleeves had been altered, its waist remade, and a narrow strip of darker fabric concealed the place where the original silk had worn thin. Her aunt had apologized for it before breakfast. Eliza had not. "A dress is only cloth," she had said. Yet inside Alderwick's entrance hall, surrounded by marble floors, polished mahogany, and women dressed in fabrics that probably cost more than her household spent in 6 months, Eliza discovered that cloth could become a language. Lady Caroline Mercer understood that language perfectly. She arrived in deep green silk with her father, Lord Charles Mercer, and within minutes had gathered a circle of admirers near the drawing-room fireplace. Caroline was beautiful in the effortless manner wealth made possible. Nothing about her appearance seemed accidental, from the pearls at her throat to the pale gloves fitted precisely to her fingers. Her gaze passed over Eliza once, paused upon the repaired cuff of her sleeve, and moved away. The dismissal was so graceful that anyone less accustomed to quiet humiliation might have missed it. Eliza did not. She simply lifted her chin. She had learned long ago that dignity did not require an audience. Her father had taught her that before his death left Hartwell Cottage with more memories than money. He had been a gentleman of modest property, generous beyond his means and hopelessly trusting in business. After his passing, accounts arrived that Eliza had never known existed. Horses were sold first. Then silver. Then most of the books from the library. By the previous winter, Eliza had begun copying correspondence for a local solicitor and giving piano lessons to 3 merchant families 6 miles away. Her aunt considered such work unfortunate. Eliza considered it useful. Still, usefulness did not keep rain from entering through an aging roof, nor did pride purchase coal. That was why her aunt had accepted the invitation to Alderwick. "You need not marry the Duke," she had whispered during their journey. "But you must allow fortune the opportunity to notice you." Eliza had looked through the carriage window at the wet Cumberland hills and said nothing. She knew what her aunt feared. Another winter. Another repair postponed. Another piece of furniture quietly sold. Yet the thought of presenting herself before a wealthy stranger, as though she were an investment, made something inside her retreat. The morning reception only deepened that feeling. Everywhere she turned, conversation seemed designed for one absent listener. One lady had suddenly developed a passionate interest in estate management because the Duke owned thousands of acres. Another spoke loudly about charitable schools. Caroline mentioned that she preferred quiet country life, although Eliza had heard her praise London society less than an hour earlier. Vincent Ashcombe had not even entered the room, yet his presence governed it. Eliza escaped toward a tall window overlooking the western gardens. Beyond the glass, servants arranged chairs along the terrace while gardeners cleared wet leaves from the paths. For the first time that morning, she breathed easily. "You are Miss Hartwell, are you not?" Caroline's voice came from behind her. Eliza turned. "I am." Caroline smiled. "I thought so. My mother once knew your family. Hartwell Cottage is rather small now, I believe." The words were perfectly polite. Their purpose was not. "It has always been large enough for kindness," Eliza replied. Caroline's smile tightened. Before she could answer, the drawing-room doors opened and Mrs. Agnes Bell announced that refreshments had been prepared before the afternoon promenade. The room stirred immediately. Eliza remained by the window for another moment, watching a thin line of sunlight appear across Stilmere Lake. She did not know that before the day ended, mud would stain her gloves, whispers would follow her into dinner, and the poorest lady at Alderwick would become the one person its master could not dismiss from his thoughts. The first clear sign that Vincent Ashcombe had entered the drawing-room was not an announcement, but silence. It moved through Alderwick like a change in weather, beginning near the double doors and spreading across the polished floor until conversations softened, fans stilled, and half a dozen young women remembered at once how gracefully they could stand. Eliza remained beside the window. She watched the transformation with quiet fascination before finally turning toward the man responsible for it. Vincent was taller than she had expected, dressed in a dark morning coat whose simplicity seemed almost severe beside the elaborate clothing surrounding him. His black hair was neatly combed, though one stubborn strand had escaped near his temple, and his gray eyes possessed none of the vanity Eliza had imagined might belong to a man so accustomed to being observed. If anything, he appeared weary of observation. Mrs. Agnes Bell approached him first, speaking quietly about some household matter. Vincent listened without interrupting. That small courtesy interested Eliza more than his title. Then Lady Caroline Mercer moved forward. "Your Grace, Alderwick is magnificent in autumn. It has survived several autumns without my assistance," Vincent replied. Caroline laughed, perhaps more warmly than the remark required. Another young lady joined them and began praising the gardens. A third mentioned that she had recently become devoted to charitable education. Within minutes, Vincent stood at the center of a carefully arranged constellation of silk, perfume, accomplishments, and agreeable opinions. He received every compliment with impeccable civility. Yet Eliza noticed something the others seemed not to see. His smile never remained after the speaker looked away. Vincent, meanwhile, had spent years recognizing the peculiar language of ambition. He knew when admiration was genuine, and when it had been rehearsed during a carriage ride. Since inheriting the dukedom, he had listened to women suddenly discover enthusiasm for horses, agriculture, architecture, poetry, and whatever else society believed might interest him. He did not resent them for it. Most were obeying the same expectations that had brought them to Alderwick. But understanding the performance did not make it less exhausting. "Lady Caroline tells me you have expanded the village school," said Lady Amelia Forsyth. "A worthy undertaking." "Mrs. Bell expanded it," Vincent answered. "I signed the accounts." Mrs. Bell, standing several feet away, lowered her eyes to conceal a smile. Caroline quickly redirected the conversation toward music. "Perhaps we might persuade Miss Hartwell to play this evening," she said, glancing toward Eliza. Several faces turned. Eliza felt the trap immediately. Caroline had heard enough that morning to know Eliza earned money teaching piano. In another setting, that fact would have been harmless. Here, spoken before women who considered paid work unfortunate, it became a reminder of rank. Vincent followed Caroline's gaze. His eyes met Eliza's for the first time. She did not lower hers, but neither did she offer the bright, practiced smile he had received from everyone else. "Do you play, Miss Hartwell?" he asked. "I do, Your Grace." "Then perhaps you would honor us." Eliza glanced at Caroline. "If the company wishes for music, Certainly. But I suspect Lady Caroline plays beautifully. A flicker of surprise crossed Caroline's face. How could you possibly know? Because you have looked at the pianoforte 3 times since entering the room. Vincent's mouth almost curved. Almost. Caroline recovered quickly. Then perhaps we shall both play. Perhaps, Eliza said. No rivalry entered her voice. That, more than the answer itself, caught Vincent's attention. She had been handed an invitation to compete and had quietly refused it. A servant entered to announce that the weather had cleared sufficiently for the promenade. The effect was immediate. Ladies collected gloves and shawls. Mothers began subtle calculations concerning walking partners. Caroline moved toward Vincent with the confidence of someone who expected the place beside him to remain available. Eliza waited until the crowd had thinned. She preferred the open air to another hour of elegant maneuvering. Outside, the clouds had lifted enough to reveal a pale strip of blue above Stilmere Lake. Rain clung to the rose bushes, and fallen copper leaves covered the gravel paths. Vincent descended the terrace with Caroline on one side and Lady Amelia on the other. Eliza followed at a distance, breathing in the clean scent of wet earth. For several minutes she forgot why she had come. Then she noticed movement beyond the garden gate. An elderly woman in a faded brown cloak was making her way slowly along the outer path, carrying a wicker basket against one hip. No one else seemed interested. Ahead, Caroline said something that made the group laugh. Vincent turned slightly, and his gaze traveled beyond them to Eliza. At that exact moment, the wicker basket slipped. Apples scattered across the wet gravel. The elderly woman reached for the iron gate to steady herself. 2 ladies nearest her hesitated, looked at the mud, and continued walking. Eliza stopped. "Miss Hartwell," Caroline called from ahead, impatience hidden beneath sweetness. "His Grace is joining us." Eliza looked toward Vincent. Then toward the woman struggling beside the gate. For one suspended second, the future her aunt wanted seemed to stand in one direction, while a stranger who needed help stood in the other. Eliza gathered her skirt. And chose the stranger. Eliza reached the garden gate just as another apple rolled beneath the dripping branches of a rosebush. "Please do not bend down," she said, catching the elderly woman gently by the arm. "I can gather them." The stranger looked at her with pale, steady eyes. Up close, Eliza noticed that the brown cloak was old but carefully maintained, its seams repaired with almost invisible stitches. There was something similarly composed about the woman herself. Her gray hair had escaped beneath her bonnet, rain had darkened one shoulder, and yet she carried herself with a dignity that seemed strangely untouched by circumstance. "You will spoil your dress," the woman said. Eliza glanced at the wet gravel. "I am afraid the dress and I have survived greater disasters than mud." The woman almost smiled. Eliza crouched and retrieved the scattered fruit one by one. Cold moisture seeped through the knees of her skirt. Her right glove turned brown at the fingertips. Behind her, the promenade continued, though several ladies had slowed enough to watch. Lady Caroline Mercer stood beneath a pale parasol, her expression hovering between amusement and disbelief. "Surely one of the servants can manage that," she called. Eliza placed 2 apples into the basket. "Perhaps," she answered. "But I am already here." Caroline exchanged a glance with Lady Amelia. The 2 women moved on. Vincent did not. He remained near the stone steps, listening only vaguely as Lord Charles Mercer discussed improvements to the northern road. His attention had settled elsewhere. He had seen the old woman before Eliza reached her. He had also seen 3 guests notice her and choose not to stop. That did not surprise him. What surprised him was Eliza. She had known he was watching. She had been invited toward him. Yet she had turned away as though his title carried less urgency than a stranger losing her balance beside a garden gate. Vincent had spent years surrounded by people who performed kindness beautifully whenever witnesses were present. Eliza Hartwell had chosen kindness at the exact moment she believed it might cost her something. "Your Grace?" Lord Charles prompted. Vincent returned his gaze to the man. "Forgive me. You were speaking of the road. Near the gate, Eliza recovered the final apple and rose. There. Nothing lost. Except your glove, the woman observed. Eliza examined the mud and laughed softly. Then the glove has had an adventurous afternoon. A colder breeze swept across Stilmere Lake. The elderly woman shivered almost imperceptibly. Eliza noticed. The orangery is close. You should sit somewhere warm. I would not wish to take you away from your company. The stranger's eyes moved toward the Duke. I suspect you came here for the same reason as every other young lady. Eliza followed her gaze. Vincent stood among people whose clothes seemed untouched by weather or uncertainty. For a moment she remembered her aunt's words. Allow fortune the opportunity to notice you. Perhaps she had just turned her back upon fortune. The thought should have frightened her more than it did. My family would certainly prefer that explanation, Eliza admitted. And what explanation do you prefer? That I came because refusing the invitation would have disappointed my aunt. The woman studied her with growing interest. You had an opportunity to speak with the Duke. There will be other conversations. You sound very certain. I am not. Eliza lifted the basket and offered her free arm. But you needed help now. Something softened in the woman's face. Do you always sacrifice opportunity for strangers, Miss Hartwell? Eliza stopped. She had not remembered giving her name, but perhaps Caroline had called it loudly enough for the woman to hear. Only when the stranger needs me more than the opportunity does. For several seconds, the elderly woman said nothing. Rain tapped softly against the glass roof of the orangery ahead. That is an expensive philosophy, she finally murmured. Sometimes. And yet you keep it. Eliza opened the orangery door. Warm air scented with citrus and damp soil drifted toward them. Some things become more valuable precisely because they cost us something. The woman entered, leaning lightly upon Eliza's arm. Inside, orange trees stood in neat rows beneath the high glass ceiling, their dark leaves shining in the muted afternoon light. Eliza set the basket beside a wooden bench and helped her companion sit. May I ask your name? The woman removed her wet gloves slowly. A curious light appeared in her eyes. Beatrice, she said. Nothing more. Eliza accepted the answer without pressing. Then, Beatrice, I shall find you some tea. Miss Hartwell. Eliza turned. Thank you. The words were simple, but the woman spoke them with unexpected gravity. Eliza smiled and disappeared toward the service passage. Outside, Vincent had finally excused himself from the promenade. He stood alone for a moment beneath the terrace arch, looking through the rain-streaked glass of the orangery. He could see the elderly woman seated among the orange trees. He could see Eliza returning with a cup balanced carefully upon a saucer. And for the first time that afternoon, the Duke allowed himself the faintest smile. Eliza Hartwell believed she had sacrificed her chance to impress him for the sake of an unknown old woman. She had no idea that the woman drinking tea beneath Alderwick's glass roof was Beatrice Ashcombe, Dowager Duchess of Ashcombe. His mother. By 7 o'clock, the rain had stopped, but its memory followed Eliza Hartwell into Alderwick's dining room in the form of a faint brown stain along the hem of her chestnut dress. She had done what she could before dinner. Her aunt had pressed the fabric with a damp cloth while quietly lamenting the disaster, and Eliza had exchanged her ruined gloves for an older pair kept in her traveling case. Yet beneath the glow of dozens of candles, among gowns of ivory, sapphire, and burgundy silk, the mark seemed darker than it had upstairs. Eliza noticed it. So did Lady Caroline Mercer. How unfortunate, Caroline murmured as the guests gathered before dinner. Her gaze rested delicately upon Eliza's skirt. Alderwick's gardens can be terribly unforgiving to fine clothes. Eliza met her eyes. Fortunately, mine have never claimed to be fine. Lady Amelia concealed a smile behind her fan. Caroline's expression remained pleasant. Still, one should take care. First impressions can be difficult to repair. Then I am fortunate again. Fabric is much easier. Before Caroline could answer, the dining room doors opened. Conversation shifted immediately as Vincent Ashcombe entered. He wore black evening clothes, severe against the warm candlelight, and paused only long enough to greet an elderly baronet before taking his place at the head of the long mahogany table. Eliza was seated nearly halfway down, between her aunt and a quiet widow from Yorkshire. Caroline, by careful arrangement or fortunate coincidence, sat close enough to Vincent to speak with him without raising her voice. Dinner began beneath the measured rhythm of silver, porcelain, and practiced conversation. Eliza had almost convinced herself that the afternoon was forgotten when Caroline turned toward Lady Amelia. "I have been thinking about charitable instincts," she said lightly. "There is something admirable about those who never hesitate to involve themselves in every small misfortune." A few guests glanced toward Eliza. Her aunt stiffened. "Indeed," Lady Amelia replied uncertainly. Caroline continued, "Though I suppose one must distinguish between kindness and the desire to appear kind." The sentence was soft, elegant, cruel only to those who understood where it had been aimed. Eliza felt warmth rise into her face. She could have explained everything. She could have told them about Beatrice trembling in the cold, about the scattered apples, about the quiet gratitude in the orangery. She could have defended herself with facts. Instead, she lifted her water glass. "I agree," she said. Caroline blinked. "You do?" "Completely. Kindness performed for applause is merely another form of vanity." Silence touched the table for half a heartbeat. Vincent looked up. Caroline's smile became thinner. "Then we understand one another." "I hope so." Eliza returned calmly to her meal, although beneath the table her fingers tightened around the linen napkin. She was not untouched by humiliation. She had simply learned that pain did not deserve command over her behavior. Across the candlelit table, Vincent watched her. He had expected her to reveal Beatrice's identity, as an elderly stranger she had rescued, perhaps to make certain everyone knew why her dress was stained. She did not. She claimed no credit at all. More strangely, she seemed unaware that credit was available. "Miss Hartwell," Vincent said. Eliza looked toward him, startled by the sudden attention. "Your Grace? Mrs. Bell tells me you teach music." Eliza felt several faces turn again. "I do. Professionally?" Caroline's father asked before Vincent could continue. The word carried the faint weight society often placed upon women who needed to earn their living. Eliza could have softened the truth. She did not. "Yes, Lord Mercer. 3 families employ me." "How industrious," Caroline said. Eliza heard her aunt inhale quietly. Vincent's expression did not change, but his voice cooled. "Alderwick employs more than 80 people, Lady Caroline. I should be in an awkward position if industry became unfashionable." No one laughed. Caroline lowered her gaze. Eliza looked at Vincent, uncertain whether he had defended her intentionally. His eyes met hers for only a moment before he turned to the gentleman beside him and changed the subject. The gesture was so restrained that it might have meant nothing. Yet something inside Eliza shifted. Later, when dinner ended and the ladies moved toward the drawing room, she lingered near the doorway to allow the older widow beside her to pass first. Vincent noticed that too. He noticed how Eliza thanked the footman who opened the door. He noticed that she addressed Mrs. Bell by name. He noticed, with growing discomfort, how rarely anyone else did. Then his gaze fell upon the mud still shadowing the hem of her dress. Eliza believed that stain had made her ridiculous in his house. Vincent saw something entirely different. In a room filled with jewels chosen to attract attention, the most memorable thing he had seen all day was a little Cumberland mud on a woman who had expected nothing in return for earning it. Long after the final notes from the drawing-room pianoforte had faded, Eliza found herself unable to sleep. Alderwick had grown quiet around her, the great house settling into the deep stillness of an October night. Her aunt had retired nearly an hour earlier, but Eliza's thoughts remained crowded with candlelight, restrained laughter, Caroline Mercer's carefully sharpened words, and most confusing of all, Vincent Ashcombe's unexpected defense at dinner. She wrapped a wool shawl around her shoulders and left her room in search of a book, hoping a few pages might quiet her mind. The library lay at the end of the western corridor, its doors partly open, warm amber light spilling across the floor. Eliza entered and stopped. Vincent stood beside the fireplace with a ledger in one hand. "Miss Hartwell." His voice was calm, but surprise briefly crossed his face. "Your Grace. Forgive me. I thought the library was empty. It usually is at this hour." He closed the ledger. "You need not leave." Eliza hesitated before walking toward the shelves. The room smelled of old leather, cedar, and dying firewood. Thousands of books rose nearly 20 feet toward the carved ceiling, while rainwater still traced silver lines down the tall windows. She reached for a volume of poetry. "You read when you cannot sleep?" Vincent asked. "I read when I would rather think about someone else's troubles than my own." Something in his expression softened. A useful habit. Silence settled between them. It was not comfortable, but neither was it unpleasant. Vincent watched her fingers move across the worn spine of the book. "Why did you come to Alderwick?" The question was so sudden that Eliza turned. "I beg your pardon? You seemed remarkably uninterested in being here this afternoon." There was no mockery in his tone, yet Eliza felt the old defensive pride rise within her. "You mean I seemed uninterested in impressing you?" Vincent did not deny it. "Most guests understand why these gatherings attract certain families. And you believe I am different? I am asking whether you are." Eliza placed the book back on the shelf. "My aunt hopes I will make an advantageous marriage." The honesty appeared to surprise him. "And you? I hope our roof survives another winter." Vincent's gaze sharpened. Eliza almost smiled. "There. Now you know the scandalous truth. Hartwell Cottage needs repairs. Our income is small. I teach music because Bills remain remarkably unimpressed by family history. You speak lightly of it. Because speaking heavily does not make the roof less expensive." Vincent moved closer to the fireplace. "Then a wealthy marriage would solve your difficulties." Eliza looked at him carefully. "Financially, perhaps. And that is not enough? Would it be enough for you?" The question stopped him. No one at Alderwick spoke to Vincent Ashcombe that way. They praised his judgment. They sought his approval. They rarely turned his questions back upon him. "My circumstances are different," he said. "Because you are a duke? Because no marriage of mine could be separated from what I possess." Eliza heard something beneath the words. Not arrogance. Weariness. "Then perhaps our circumstances are not so different." Vincent's eyes met hers. "Explain. You wonder whether people want the man or the title." "I wonder whether a man would want the woman or simply someone grateful enough to accept security." The fire shifted softly behind him. For a moment neither spoke. Vincent had spent years guarding that particular wound so carefully that hearing it described by a woman he had known for less than a day felt almost intrusive. Yet Eliza had not spoken with pity. She had merely recognized it. "And if someone offered you everything Hartwell Cottage requires?" he asked. "In exchange for what?" "Marriage." "Without affection? Without certainty of it?" Eliza considered the question. "Then I would rather teach twice as many pupils. Even if the roof failed? I would purchase buckets." A quiet laugh escaped him before he could prevent it. Eliza stared. The sound seemed unfamiliar even to Vincent. "You find poverty amusing, Your Grace?" "No." "Your buckets. They are excellent buckets." His smile remained for another second, then faded into something gentler. "You are an unusual woman, Miss Hartwell." "That is what people say when they cannot decide whether they approve of me." "I have not decided." "Then I shall try to endure the uncertainty." She took another book from the shelf and moved toward the door. As she passed him, Vincent spoke again. "For what it is worth, I did not think your dress looked ridiculous tonight." Eliza stopped. Her fingers tightened around the book. "I did not know you had noticed." "I noticed." 2 words. Nothing more. Yet when Eliza finally returned to the corridor, her heartbeat felt strangely louder in the silent house. Vincent remained beside the dying fire, staring at the doorway after she disappeared. He had begun the conversation intending to discover what Eliza Hartwell wanted from him. Instead, he had learned something far more dangerous. She wanted almost nothing from him at all. Morning came to Alderwick beneath a sky washed pale after the rain, and by 11 o'clock the eastern terrace had been arranged for tea. White linen covered the tables, silver pots reflected the weak October sunlight, and beyond the stone balustrade Stilmere Lake lay almost perfectly motionless beneath a veil of mist. Eliza had slept badly. More than once she had remembered Vincent's quiet laugh in the library, and each time she had firmly reminded herself that a conversation was merely a conversation. Dukes did not become less dangerous to sensible judgment simply because they appreciated good buckets. She was standing near the terrace steps when Vincent approached. "Miss Hartwell." "Your Grace. I have been informed that the southern path offers the best view of the lake this morning." "By whom?" "My gardener." "Then I trust his judgment." A faint amusement entered Vincent's eyes. "Would you walk with me?" Eliza became suddenly aware of Caroline Mercer watching from beside the tea table. "For a short distance," she answered. They had barely taken 3 steps when movement near the servants' courtyard caught Eliza's attention. An elderly woman in a faded brown cloak emerged carrying the same wicker basket from the previous afternoon. "Beatrice." Eliza stopped. "Excuse me." Vincent followed her gaze. His expression changed so slightly that another person might have missed it. Eliza did not. "You know her?" she asked. "I have seen her before." It was true, though not remotely complete. Beatrice crossed toward the terrace, moving slowly with a walking stick Eliza had not noticed the previous day. Several guests glanced at her. Caroline recognized her immediately. "Surely that woman should use the service entrance," she murmured to Lady Amelia. Beatrice heard. She gave no sign. A footman hurried forward, but before he reached her, Eliza had already left Vincent's side. "Beatrice, good morning." The old woman looked up. "Miss Hartwell. I appear to have interrupted something." "Nothing that cannot survive interruption." Eliza noticed there were no empty chairs nearby. Caroline's shawl occupied one. Lady Amelia's embroidery basket occupied another. Eliza turned to the table. "May I borrow this chair?" Caroline placed one hand upon its carved back. "We are expecting additional guests." Eliza looked across the terrace. At least 6 chairs stood unused farther away. "Then I shall return it before they arrive." She lifted the chair herself and carried it toward Beatrice. Vincent watched without speaking. "You must not trouble yourself," Beatrice said. "It is a chair, not a cathedral." Eliza set it down. Beatrice laughed softly and Saturday. "Tea?" Eliza asked. "If it does not endanger your social prospects beyond repair." "I fear they were already fragile." Vincent lowered his gaze, concealing a smile. Eliza poured tea and added no sugar after remembering how Beatrice had taken it the previous afternoon. That small detail did not escape the older woman. Neither did it escape Vincent. Caroline approached at last, perhaps sensing that the Duke's attention had drifted somewhere she had not intended. "Your Grace, Lord Mercer wished to discuss the music for this evening's ball." Vincent turned to her politely. "Then Lord Mercer may discuss it with Mrs. Bell. She understands music better than I do." Caroline's smile faltered. "Of course." Her gaze shifted toward Beatrice, then to Eliza. "Miss Hartwell seems determined to collect unusual acquaintances." Eliza's hand paused over the teapot. Beatrice remained perfectly still. Vincent's face became unreadable. "I had not realized kindness required a pedigree," Eliza said. Caroline gave a light laugh. "You misunderstand me." "I hope I do." There was no anger in Eliza's voice, only quiet certainty. Caroline returned to her table. Beatrice watched her go, then looked at Vincent. For one brief moment, mother and son exchanged a glance filled with years of understanding. Eliza saw it. Her brow furrowed. Have you two met? Vincent answered before Beatrice could. Alderwick is not so large that people remain strangers forever. Beatrice lifted her cup to hide her amusement. Eliza accepted the explanation, though something about it felt incomplete. A few minutes later, Mrs. Bell approached and whispered that Beatrice's carriage was waiting beyond the eastern drive. Eliza helped her rise. Will you be here this evening? She asked. Beatrice adjusted her faded cloak. Would you be pleased to see me? Very. The old woman touched Eliza's hand. Then perhaps you shall. She walked away with Mrs. Bell, leaving Eliza beside Vincent. Silence lingered between them. You abandoned our walk, he said at last. Eliza turned toward him. I did. Without hesitation. Beatrice needed a chair. And I did not. Eliza searched his face, uncertain whether he was teasing her. You appear capable of standing, Your Grace. This time Vincent laughed openly. Several heads turned. Caroline's among them. But Vincent no longer cared. He looked toward the eastern drive where his mother had disappeared, then back at Eliza. Yesterday could have been chance. A single generous impulse. A moment performed without calculation. Today had answered the question. Eliza had left his side when she had everything to gain by remaining there. She had done it for the same old woman, believing her poor, unimportant, and unable to offer anything in return. Vincent had spent years wondering whether anyone could see beyond the title he carried. Now he found himself unable to look away from a woman who seemed instinctively drawn toward everyone society had trained itself not to see. And across the terrace, Caroline Mercer watched the Duke watching Eliza Hartwell, and understood for the first time that the competition she believed she was winning had quietly become something else entirely. By 8 o'clock that evening, Alderwick's ballroom had become a world of candlelight and expectation. Hundreds of flames trembled in crystal chandeliers, turning the tall windows into dark mirrors and casting warm gold across the polished floor. Beyond the glass, Stilmere Lake had disappeared beneath the October night, while inside, silk whispered, jewels flashed, and the orchestra waited beneath the musicians' gallery. Eliza stood beside her aunt near a marble column, wearing the same chestnut gown she had carefully brushed after dinner. The stain along its hem remained faintly visible. She had considered hiding it beneath darker ribbon, then decided against it. Mud had caused enough trouble without being granted the dignity of shame. Across the room, Lady Caroline Mercer appeared magnificent in silver blue silk. She had spent the afternoon recovering her confidence, and now she stood beside her father with the calm assurance of a woman who believed the evening would restore the natural order of things. The first dance traditionally belonged to the most honored unmarried lady present. More than one guest expected Vincent to choose Caroline. Caroline clearly expected it herself. Vincent stood near the foot of the grand staircase speaking with Lord Charles Mercer, though his attention wandered repeatedly toward Eliza. Their eyes met once. Neither smiled. Yet Eliza felt the memory of the library return with unsettling clarity. His quiet laugh. His question about marriage. His admission that wealth made sincerity difficult to recognize. She looked away first. Then the ballroom doors opened. Mrs. Bell entered. Beside her walked an elderly woman. Eliza recognized the posture before she recognized anything else. Beatrice, she whispered. But the woman crossing the threshold was transformed. The faded brown cloak was gone. In its place fell a gown of black silk, elegant without extravagance, its high collar fastened by a diamond brooch. Pearls rested at her throat. Her gray hair was arranged beneath a delicate lace covering, and in one gloved hand she carried a silver-topped walking stick engraved with the Ashcombe crest. Conversation faltered. Caroline's face lost its color. Lady Amelia lowered her fan. Lord Charles Mercer straightened as though someone had pulled an invisible cord through his spine. Eliza looked from them to Beatrice, bewildered. No servant announced her. None was necessary. Vincent turned. For the first time since Eliza had met him, something openly tender entered his expression. He crossed the ballroom while every gaze followed him. One step. Then another. He stopped before the elderly woman and offered his arm. "Mother!" The single word seemed louder than the orchestra could ever have been. Eliza forgot to breathe. Beatrice Ashcombe. Dowager Duchess of Ashcombe. The woman whose apples she had gathered from the mud. The woman Caroline had wanted sent toward the servants' entrance. The woman Eliza had seated at tea while believing she possessed no greater claim upon Alderwick than any other stranger. Caroline's lips parted, but nothing came. Beatrice placed her hand upon Vincent's arm. "I hope I have not kept your guests waiting." "They have survived," Vincent replied. His eyes briefly found Eliza's. Understanding struck her with such force that she lowered her gaze. He had known. Of course he had known. Every strange glance between mother and son suddenly made sense. Beatrice greeted several guests as she crossed the room. She offered Caroline the same impeccable courtesy she offered everyone else. No accusation. No humiliation. That restraint somehow made Caroline's discomfort more complete. At last Beatrice reached Eliza. "Miss Hartwell." Eliza curtsied quickly. "Your Grace. I fear I owe you an apology." "For what?" "I called you Beatrice." "It is my name." A murmur of restrained amusement moved through those close enough to hear. Eliza's cheeks warmed. "I did not know. That was rather the point." Beatrice looked toward Mrs. Bell, who stepped forward carrying a small parcel wrapped in cream-colored paper. Beatrice took it and placed it in Eliza's hands. "You forgot something yesterday." Eliza opened the paper. Inside lay her white gloves. The mud had been carefully washed away, though one faint brown mark remained near the right thumb. She stared at them. "I thought they were ruined." "Some stains deserve to remain," Beatrice said softly. "They remind us what our hands were doing when they became soiled." The ballroom had grown remarkably quiet. Eliza looked up. Beatrice's expression held no triumph, only warmth. "You helped me when you believed I could do nothing for you. Yesterday, that told me something about your character. This morning you did it again. That told me it was not an accident." Caroline shifted several feet away. Beatrice did not even glance toward her. "Your Grace," Eliza whispered, "I would have helped you regardless." "I know, my dear." Beatrice smiled. "That is precisely why I am thanking you." Behind her, the orchestra leader raised his bow, waiting for Vincent's signal to begin. Every unmarried woman in the ballroom seemed suddenly aware of what came next. Vincent looked toward Caroline. For one suspended heartbeat, expectation returned to her face. Then he walked past her. Past Lady Amelia. Past every jeweled woman who had spent 2 days calculating how best to capture his attention. He stopped before Eliza. She held the cleaned gloves against her chest, too surprised to speak. Vincent extended his hand. "Miss Hartwell," he said quietly, while the entire ballroom waited, "I believe I owe you a dance." Eliza looked at Vincent's outstretched hand while the ballroom seemed to hold its breath around them. For 2 days she had watched women measure every smile, every word, every movement according to whether it might please him. Now, with every important family at Alderwick watching, the Duke offered the first dance to the woman who had done almost nothing to seek it. Eliza slowly placed her hand in his. "I believe you do, Your Grace." The orchestra began. Vincent led her onto the polished floor, and the other guests moved aside before joining the dance behind them. Candlelight passed across his face as they turned beneath the chandeliers. Eliza was aware of Caroline somewhere beyond his shoulder, of her aunt standing speechless near the marble column, of Beatrice watching with quiet satisfaction. Yet within moments, the room seemed strangely distant. "You knew who she was," Eliza said softly. "This morning, certainly. And yesterday?" "From the moment I saw her beside the gate." Eliza nearly missed a step. "Then why did you say nothing?" "Because my mother asked me not to. She was testing us." "Not exactly." Vincent's expression became thoughtful. "She has spent years watching families become extraordinarily virtuous whenever they enter this house. She wished to attend the gathering without everyone performing for the Dowager Duchess." Eliza glanced toward Beatrice. That explains the cloak. She has always possessed a theatrical streak. A smile touched Eliza's mouth. And what did she expect to discover? I suspect she expected very little. Vincent paused as the music softened. Then you picked up her apples. Eliza lowered her eyes. Anyone should have done that. Yes. His voice became quieter. That is precisely what troubled me. Anyone should have. Almost no one did. They moved beneath the chandeliers in silence for several measures. Your mother's approval appears to have made me suddenly fascinating, Eliza said. Then everyone in this room has misunderstood. She looked up. Vincent's gaze held hers steadily. My mother did not tell me to notice you. I noticed you before she told me anything. Eliza's composure faltered. Why? Because you thanked my servants by name. Because you admitted you work for money without pretending it embarrasses you. Because Lady Caroline attempted to diminish you and you refused to diminish her in return. Because you left me standing on a terrace for an old woman who needed a chair. Eliza smiled despite herself. You survived. Barely. A quiet laugh escaped her, and Vincent felt something inside him loosen that had been guarded for far too long. When the dance ended, he did not make a grand declaration. He merely bowed and asked whether she would walk with him the following morning. Eliza accepted. The following morning became another walk. Then another. The autumn gathering ended, but Vincent found reasons to visit Hartwell Cottage, where he discovered that Eliza had not exaggerated about the roof or the buckets. He did not simply pay for its repair. He listened when she explained that charity without choice could become another form of dependence, and together they arranged fair work for local craftsmen, while Eliza continued teaching her pupils. Beatrice visited often, always arriving properly dressed now, although she occasionally brought apples merely to make Eliza laugh. Winter settled over Cumberland. Letters traveled between Alderwick and Hartwell Cottage. Conversations grew longer. Silence became easier. Vincent discovered that Eliza never treated his loneliness as something she was responsible for curing. Eliza discovered that beneath his reserve was not coldness, but a man exhausted by being valued for everything surrounding him. By spring, when the rose garden awakened again, Vincent asked Eliza to meet him beside the same iron gate where they had first truly noticed one another. There was no audience, no orchestra, no carefully arranged gathering. Only evening sunlight across Stilmere Lake and the scent of new roses carried through the mild air. I could offer you security, Vincent said. Alderwick. A title. Everything your aunt once hoped you might find here. Eliza watched him quietly. But that is not what I am offering. He took her hand. I am offering myself, without requiring gratitude for anything else. Eliza Hartwell, will you marry me? Her eyes filled with warmth, but her answer came steadily. Yes, Vincent. Their wedding that summer was elegant but deliberately small. Caroline Mercer sent a gracious letter, and Eliza answered it with equal grace. There was no revenge because none was needed. The life Eliza built at Alderwick became vindication enough. She established a permanent village music school and worked beside Beatrice to expand assistance for widows and elderly residents throughout the estate. Vincent never asked her to stop teaching. Years later, a pair of white gloves remained inside a small cedar box in Eliza's dressing room. One still carried the faintest brown mark near the thumb. She could easily have replaced them. She never did. For whenever she looked at that stain, she remembered the afternoon when everyone else had been looking toward power while she had looked toward someone who needed a hand. And perhaps that was why Vincent loved her so deeply. Some people reveal their worth by how brightly they shine before the powerful. Others reveal it by whom they notice when they believe the powerful are nowhere in sight.